The most significant reforms in decades are on the way for New Zealand fisheries.
It's driven by a need to boost the productivity, boost the jobs, and create more export income out of this sector, which is really valuable in certain parts of regional New Zealand.
Minister for Oceans and Fisheries, Shane Jones, has outlined the proposed changes to the Fisheries Act, and the marine environment sector isn't happy.
It's probably safe to say that we'll see an acceleration of the current trajectory, which I'd like to call a doom loop. We're not going to be able to restore the fisheries. We're not actually going to see more fish in the water. We're going to see a bigger fight over a smaller and smaller piece of pie.
There are people from the civil society, no, actually that's to ruin a good word, from the NGOs, they're not civil society. They will no doubt engage with me on the document.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, the Fisheries Act. What's being proposed, the pros, the cons, and who's rocking the boat. When you first heard or first saw it, what was your immediate reaction?
Bewilderment.
That's Sam Wolford from Legacy, a non-profit organisation dedicated to supporting and restoring the marine environment.
We want some long-term thinking. We don't want a 3-year election cycle soundbite grabbing reform process. We actually want something that's going to put us on the right trajectory. And what we've had over the last decade in particular is a series of poor decision-making from the officials to actually put us into this position now where it feels very much like it's a short-term approach. It's we're going back to the 80s. It's neoliberal sort of behaviour, whereas if we're not careful, we're going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg.
Is Shane Jones the right person to be leading this, do you think?
Well, he's also the ex-chair of Sea Lords, so I personally feel that there is definitely a conflict of interest here, and looking at the relationship that he's got with the seafood industry, I can't help but feel that there's a bias towards one stakeholder, and there are lots of stakeholders in fisheries where we know that, and that's what he needs to be more considerate of.
I have to say, there is one school of thought that ministers should not be involved in any manner or form with making sustainability decisions because we're politicians and we might be susceptible to blandishments and other sorts of depredations. As a politician, I dismiss all that filigree, not interested in that.
So what are the proposed changes to the Fisheries Act? Well, set out by the government last month, they want to streamline regulations, improve data collection and enhance sustainability while protecting the privacy of fishers. The consultation document outlines options to change sustainable catch limits, discard rules under the quota management system and onboard camera regulations. This includes barring footage from being included in Official Information Act requests.
If there are offences being committed in the industry, they should be charged in the court of a legal forum, not charged on TikTok, not charged in the court of public opinion. And obviously, camera footage, in the event a prosecution should come to pass, is very valuable. But I do not agree it should be turned into some sort of ideological commodity used to hammer out of context what the industry is doing when they are incredibly conscious of their social licence.
That's Minister Shane Jones speaking at the launch of the document outlining the proposed changes. He's long been vocal about not wanting cameras on boats and doesn't think the public needs to know what is happening.
No, I don't believe in state surveillance. Does the public have the right to know what's happening in every cowshed tonight? Does the public have a right to know what's happening in every egg farm? Does the public have a right to know what's happening in your home? No, they don't. The public should expect that the regulator will take robust action when offences are detected, and if it comes to pass that the camera footage enables the state to fulfil their prosecutorial obligations, that's what the public should have confidence in.
Bewildering. I mean, what on earth? Why would we not want to give transparency? We stand up with our trade nations and we say we've got this amazing quota management system. We wax lyrical about how we're managing our fish populations, but then we won't let people see what's going on. So it very much feels like it's out of sight, out of mind. Now, the argument around privacy, I can understand that there's concerns here, but...
Because that's what I wanted to ask you about. That is his argument. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, here we are. We're sitting in the Radio New Zealand building right now. I had to look into a camera just to get on the elevator. I had to sign in. I came into town, so I've probably been on 3 cameras just to make this interview. But I'll give you a really good example because I took my motorbike in to be serviced a little while ago. And I took it back home, everything was great, and then there was a little bit of oil on the garage floor. And so I called up my mechanic and I said, mate, did you do the oil filters? There's still a little bit of oil on the floor. And he goes, Sam, to be honest, I can't remember. But I'll tell you what, I go back through the footage, I've got a camera in the workshop, and we'll go back through and check it out. And he just rewound the footage, and he goes, yep, look, there's the filter coming off, boom, boom, boom. Oh, sorry, just give it a bit of a tighten, and you'll be away. So in his business, cameras are actually an advantage. They show the transparency, and it gives him real confidence that he's, servicing his customers appropriately. So, I mean, why the commercial fishing industry can't see it as a positive is bewildering to me.
So if the footage from onboard cameras remains publicly accessible, how do you suggest balancing privacy concerns for fishers then?
Well, I mean, if we look at technology, the advancements of AI in the last decade, it's amazing what we're doing. In fact, it's highly unlikely that people would actually be looking at a lot of this footage just because of the sheer quantity of it. It would all be managed through AI. There's plenty of ways to resolve the privacy concerns.
Have you got any examples, Sam, where access to footage has directly led to better environmental or compliance outcomes?
I think the key indicator is the statistics. So we know that there was a 46% increase in discards when cameras were actually rolled out. So reporting of discards. And again, there's that 900% increase in the reporting of discards of snapper and kingfish. So cameras are showing that there's a problem with how we fish. They're not going to resolve the problem. We're still using these indiscriminate fishing techniques, but it's highlighting to the public how our quota management system's failing us. And I think that's the thing that they're uncomfortable with, is the transparency that, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
The fishing industry generates around $1.6 billion in exports every year and employs 9,000 people directly. In a bid to improve efficiency, certainty and responsiveness, Minister Jones wants to cut red tape from decision-making processes. Legacy says don't.
He wants to allow the management processes to change so the public are actually removed from the consultation processes. So future fisheries management decisions, we're out. We've got no say in it. The minister gets to do autonomously what he wants to do. And for me, it's not about expediting this process. It's actually about having a robust, good process. Now, a robust process means actually listening to the differing views of stakeholders. Yes, you're going to expedite this process if you remove the public who are concerned about the longevity of these natural resources. Yes, that's going to make things a lot faster, but it arguably is also going to make the decline a lot faster. It's a short-term greed at a long-term environmental cost sort of scenario. And it's really alarming that they would want to take public consultation out of it. They're our fish. The public own these fisheries. So we have every right to have a say.
Are there parts, though, that are perhaps being over-regulated or stifled by red tape that you think could be tweaked?
The reason that this is such a frustration for the commercial fishing industry is because they've regulated land all catch. And so there is a legal obligation for them to land all these fish. Now, that was introduced because the quota management system is a single species management system, but they are legally allowed to use indiscriminate fishing techniques. So the government at the time introduced land all catch as a way to drive transition, to be more selective in your fishing so that you didn't have to land all this catch. So Jones is just merely talking about rolling back regulation. And I can understand the frustration there, and I think that in some ways that has become burdensome, but that's because we're failing to transition this fishing industry into something more selective.
But major players in the fishing industry welcome the proposed changes, saying they are overdue and will help New Zealand to fight its way back to economic prosperity. Here's Doug Paulin, CEO of Sealord, at the document launch.
Look, I think it's a great start to being able to amend a framework which has been around for a long time whilst the industry has changed substantially. The amount of technology we're using now in terms of catch reporting, in terms of ensuring that the officials know every day what we're catching, where we're catching it, means that it enables a framework to become much more agile and flexible than what it is today. That in turn takes out costs, it enables us to invest more in innovation, and more in changing things like modernising our boats, which is good for the fisheries and it's good for fishing and it's good for the economy. That said, I think it's a start. I think there is more to do, and the Minister did reference other changes which we are looking to recommend as part of working with the Ministry of Primary Industries, and that document is under preparation as we speak.
Doug welcomes amending commercial fish discard rules to allow unwanted fish to be dumped overboard at sea.
Really what the Minister's talking about is you've been able to discard once it's been monitored, but you still have to declare that catch against your quota holdings, or you have to pay deemed or double deemed value. So it doesn't overturn what has been set in place by the Labor government. What it does is manage the process of how that's actually going to occur. And what it also means is you don't have to land species where actually it has no economic value. You're then able to return it to the sea, and that's the best place to return it, because I bring those fish onto sea and then they go to landfill, and then it gets turned into methanol, and has a whole lot of unintended consequences. So by being able to return it to the ecosystem, then it's a much better result for us all. And because it's either monitored by observers or it's on a camera, then you can prove that that it's been done. And I think that's one of the biggest changes is technology and the ability for more surety for the ministry.
Legacy does not support the Minister's proposed change to discard rules. Sam says that discarding dead, unwanted catch means fishers can then take more sea stock to meet their quota.
He wants to legalise dumping of unwanted fish catch off the back of the boats, which for us it's really alarming because that immediately leads into high grading.
High grading means chucking out the low-value fish and keeping the larger, more valuable ones. It's all about profit.
If you don't like what you're catching, you can throw it over the side. Now, while some quota species might be allocated against catch entitlements, it doesn't do anything for the seaweed, the invertebrates, all the other species, the biodiversity that lives down in the ocean. Under the quota management system, you can have, say, a ton of snapper allocated, but if you go out there and you drag a net, you're not just going to catch snapper, you're going to catch other species as well. Now, that could be quota species or non-quota species, but it all comes up in the net. And inevitably, by being dragged from the seafloor, you're going to be dead, dying, severely injured. So it's a really destructive way of fishing. In fact, the quota management system actually allows a 10% other mortality allowance on all of these trawl fisheries. So if you've got 4,500 tonnes of snapper allocated, they're allowed to kill another 450 tonnes through the process of fishing. So if they're then allowed to high grade, they can throw anything that is of no economic value over the side. Now, that immediately incentivises them to discard, because if it's not of economic value, they throw it away and they start fishing again. And we're back into this doom loop of indiscriminate fishing techniques.
And does that mean stocks go down, and that's one of your biggest concerns? Absolutely.
We have to prioritise the health of the marine environment. We advocate to restore the populations. We want to see, in technical terms, we want to see 50% of original biomass. And that means to have an audacious aim to rebuild the fisheries to 50% of what they used to be.
I go quite a bit to Whangamata, and I know a lot of the recreational fishermen are concerned there, in part because it says it targets them more and it backs the commercial fishermen, and it's going to take food off the table for everyday Kiwis. Talk us through that.
Yeah, 90% of our fish is exported, so I think that's the first key thing. So we export about 400,000 kilos of fish every single year. Domestically, we consume about 40,000 tonnes. Now, that 40,000 tonnes is customary, it's commercial, and it's recreational. So that's the first thing, is that that export receipt is still prioritised by MPI and by the government. But the second fact is that through Legacy and our partnerships with Papatūānuku Kōkiri Marae, West Haven Marina, OBC, we have actually developed something called the Kaika Project. And we've realised that Māori Pacific communities, they love the heads and frames. It's the best part of the fish. Collectively, we've shared 500,000 kilos of fish over the last few years. Now, dumping and discarding of fish is completely contra to what the public wants to see happen. What we're going to see is more wanton destruction, more wasteful practices in order to gain those export receipts, rather than giving a priority to feeding Kiwis.
Sam mentions Māori there, so where do Māori stand in this document? Well, Minister Jones says it's, quote, not overly slanted to Māoridom.
As the former chair of Te Hukai Moana and the former chair of Sea Lords, I expect my own people to stand shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the industry and pay their way. The rights that were protected and safeguarded in the fisheries settlement will be upheld, but after that settlement, the expectation of New Zealanders is that irrespective of your background or your ethnicity, we're all in this together to ensure that the industry remains a sustainable enterprise, but at the same time maintains jobs, income, and some viability for we communities.
And what about his coalition partners? Where did they sit on this?
We all campaigned on different things, and the document does not commit Cabinet to one particular outcome. I think it's fair to say that Rewi, Mr Seymour, he wants to see deregulation. I think it's fair to say as well, though, that National would be very conscious that somehow I don't unwittingly fracture the social licence around fishing. I think I'm enhancing it, but I accept that my view is only one in a myriad of voices.
Legacy hopes the Minister listens to the voices of recreational fishermen.
We've also got to recognise the incredible value of the recreational fishing industry. It's big business. I was just at the boat show down in town a few weeks ago, and there's some large boats. There's international tourists coming in. There are super yachts coming into the country to have refits. So the recreational boating industry must be considered as part of that economic opportunity, and inviting people to come and experience our environment would be the first step. It's not all about export receipts. It's actually about bringing people to the country as well.
Just tell us, what is the state of our ocean like for fishermen and fisheries at the moment? How are we looking?
In my lifetime, I've seen a pretty significant decline. So, I've done a lot of diving and I've spent a lot of time up and down the coast. We sail as a family. And in the few decades that I've been doing that, it's definitely got worse. Scallop fisheries closed. And that also means that the industry is gone, by the way. That industry that was reliant on scallops is no more. Crayfish are under all sorts of pressure. We're seeing High Court decisions coming frequently encouraging the government to actually make more conservative decisions. Forest and Bird have just had a win in court about tarakihi because it was mismanaged. So we see hapoka. There are lots of these fisheries that are just quietly just disappearing. And they start off by getting harder to find, and then suddenly they're just not being caught anymore, and they just dwindle away over a period of decades. And that's the really concerning thing, is that it happens slowly, so it's not necessarily something that people tangibly feel.
And are people having to go further and further and further out for their fishing? And what sort of problems does this pose?
People are definitely travelling further. It's becoming more of an elite thing to do. The bigger the boats, the bigger the fuel cost, which obviously creates its own environmental concerns as well. But it also creates safety concerns. So the weather's getting worse. We're seeing through climate change, we're actually seeing more aggressive weather patterns. And so it's becoming a safety concern as well. So it's absolutely pushing everything out. If
these proposed changes, if they go ahead, just for your everyday recreational fishermen, what impact will it have on them?
Well, it's probably safe to say that we'll see an acceleration of the current trajectory, which I'd like to call a doom loop. And until we get to the point where we're addressing the fundamental issues of overharvest, destructive fishing techniques, and land-based runoff, we're not going to be able to restore the fisheries. We're not actually going to see more fish in the water. We're going to see a bigger fight over a smaller and smaller piece of pie. Whereas what we're proposing is we take the pressure off now, we can actually rebuild the fisheries, and we can actually have an abundance so that New Zealanders, Kiwis, families can go out and catch feed for themselves.
So what is Legacy proposing?
Short-term pain. We have to be serious about the fact that there might need to be some constraint in the short term, but it also needs to be a shared vision of rebuilding the fisheries. So we know that the public are not receptive to reducing catch limits because they know that the majority of it will still be exported. So it's got to be a holistic approach, and we've got to support a transition into more selective fishing techniques. There is absolutely no reason why we couldn't gather scallops hand gathering, on scuba tanks. We do it with kina, we do it with power. So there's a very active diving industry. So there's no reason why we can't transition into more selective fishing. And that's ultimately what we want to see. We know that there's environmental, social and economic stresses on our natural resources. So it's got to be a holistic package. It can't just be a kind of a shut it down and walk away sort of scenario.
Legacy has fought proposed changes by the government in the recent past.
In 2022, David Parker put through some technical changes to the Fisheries Act, and in that was something called the preset decision rules, which is exactly the same as what they're proposing now. And he didn't realise it at the time, but he did realise it in time. So before the second reading, he actually passed a supplementary audit paper which killed it all, because he realised the significance, the autonomy that those preset decision rules would give a minister, and he future-proofed that by pulling it out, because he realised that it was not safe for ministers to have that sort of power.
Sam, what would a sustainable but productive fishing sector look like in your view?
Low impact, high value. Again, I'll give you an example. Fishing coral trout over in Australia, they handline it, they catch them live, they catch them to the right sort of size, so the hooks and everything is very specific to getting a fish that's roughly 30-35 centimetres. They export them live. The fishermen, the guys on the boats, get about $20 a fish. The guys who actually export them get about $20 a fish. By the time it gets to Tokyo or the final destination, you're talking $100 a fish. So what we could do is, we've got beautiful fish down here. Like, seafood in New Zealand is amazing, but we've got to focus on a low impact, high value fishery. That's how we can get those economic receipts.
There has to be changes, just not the ones that Shane Jones is making.
Correct. We have to evolve. We're at a point where it's kind of evolve or die. We need this transition. We need something, but it's not to double down on the current project or processes. It's to actually look meaningful at the key pain points and the fundamental stresses, which are overfishing and destructive fishing techniques.
Feedback for the proposed changes was meant to close this month, but has been extended 2 weeks until April 11th. Here's Minister Jones again speaking to journalists.
So please report it accurately. I'm not going to walk back any of my rhetoric. Having said that, I know that it's a consultation process and there'll be a variety of views that eventually we'll have to take account of as a cabinet, and my expectation is that legislation will be passed before the next election.
What I find particularly egregious about this is that clearly the commercial industry has had a lot to do with these proposals, and part of that is the idea that they'd remove public consultation from future fisheries management decisions. Now, they've been working on this for 12 or 13 months. They've given New Zealanders 6 weeks. 6 weeks to understand the complexity of these issues and decide whether they actually want to be involved in the future of our fisheries or not. So I think that's appalling.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Sam Woolford. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Jeremy Veal. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.